All right, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this Wednesday. I'm Laura Miller, and I'm the Volunteer and Community Engagement Manager for Justine, formerly known as Madison Area Urban Ministry. I think we just came up on our year anniversary of having our new name. Justine has the mission of helping to transform individual lives and social systems to create a just and equitable community. I'm delighted to welcome you to our 6th session of Just Conversations. It's a big one. We envision the series to engage our neighbors in discussion around important, timely issues that are affecting our community. And our hope is to keep it in more of a conversational format and focused on creating solutions as opposed to restating the problems. Logistical items, we are on Zoom with a bunch of people, and then I'm also streaming this live on our Facebook page, Justine's Facebook page. So welcome to anyone watching anywhere. Feel free to drop questions in the chat in Zoom or comments on Facebook, and we're hoping to end the session with about 10 or 15 minutes of question time. That said, this is a really big topic and we have a lot of questions and things to get into. So without delay, I'm going to actually send it over to Kim Wolf. She's Justine's Rapid Rehousing Resource Specialist, among other things, and she'll be kicking off the night. Kim?
Hi, everybody. As Laura said, my name is Kim Wolf, and I am working in Justine's Rapid Rehousing program. So I just want, for those of you who don't know about Rapid Rehousing, I just want to kind of explain what the program is and how it works. So the overall goal of Rapid Rehousing is to help people get into permanent affordable housing through government funding. And in all rapid rehousing projects and programs within at least our area, we receive, every program, people working in it receive referrals from the coordinated entry here that works with the Homeless Services Consortium. And those referrals are determined based on people who are found to be of the highest need to get into housing. And that also has relation to their vulnerability to COVID-19. All of those programs get funding through the government, through HUD, and are able to cover assistance with application fees, security deposits, and rent assistance, and provide case management services to those in the program as well. The biggest difference with Justine's Rapid Rehousing program is that we are the only one in our area that is able to cover full rental payments for individuals at fair market rent. All the other programs cover a percentage of rent and some taper off at the end so people can get used to paying that on their own. For us, we can cover for up to a full year. We also have an additional criteria that all of the referrals we receive are individuals who have some sort of involvement with the criminal justice system. So that adds on to some struggles people might be facing towards getting into their own housing. So next, I'd like the rest of the panelists to introduce themselves. So Shanita, would you like to go next?
Sure. So I am Shanita Lawrence, one of the newer additions to Justine. Have a couple of roles, but right now my most important, well, not my most important, but I am the Rapid Rehousing case manager. So I am assisting people who are coming off of the coordinated entry list and trying to find them housing. I'm also the resource specialist, so I do work with other people through our Journey Home program. Yeah, a couple of other hats. I tip in on a couple of circles of support meetings, our parent pathway with PIO. Acronyms, right? But so our
Inside Out.
Thank you, Parenting Inside Out. Couldn't get it. I'm like, pathways? No? Okay, so yeah, our Parenting Inside Out program. I will be facilitating one day. But right now I'm just in the back scenes learning how everything is done. And I got to be a part of the second cohort, so that was really cool. I think that's all I do. I don't know if there's anything else, but yeah, that's just a brief snippet of what I do here at Justine.
Thank you, Shanita. Heidi, would you be able to introduce yourself next?
Sure. Thanks, Kimberly. I'm Heidi Wegleitner. I represent District 2 on the Dane County Board and have been serving in that capacity since April of 2012 and have worked on a lot of housing and homelessness issues and served on a number of committees related to housing and homelessness. And really the issue of housing insecurity and tenants' rights and economic justice are what motivated me to get involved in local politics. And because of my day job, I'm a tenants' rights attorney. I work for Legal Action of Wisconsin, which is a legal aid firm that represents low-income people in the state of Wisconsin. So I do a lot of eviction defense and representation of folks who are in subsidized housing programs and homeless assistance programs. And I'm excited to be here with you all tonight. But I'm not here representing Legal Action. I'm here in my own personal capacity.
Thank you, Heidi. We also have Byron Bishop here with us this evening. Byron, would you be able to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Byron Bishop. I work for the City of Madison Department of Civil Rights. I'm the Equal Opportunities Division Manager, and where we handle discrimination complaints for employment, housing, and public accommodations.
Thank you, Byron. I just want to thank all of our panelists for being here with us tonight. We do have somebody who may be joining us later on who may be running late, so hopefully they will make it. So I'd like to start by stating that we at Just Dane believe to be obvious that high quality, safe, affordable housing is a fundamental human right. And our struggles with housing here in Dane County are not unique and they aren't new. Our country, both at the federal and local level, has long recognized that housing is a requirement for adequate standard of living, but has failed in putting in the fair systems in place to make that a reality for all of the citizens of our country. Heidi, I'm wondering if you could start us off with a brief overview of the local, state, and federal legislation that's played into this issue over the past decade or so. There's so many terms that are thrown around like exclusionary zoning, rent control, redlining, income-based rentals. I'm sure there's plenty more. And Byron, I'd also love to get your input as well on how this various legislation has been tinged with racism, sexism, classism, etc., with other unfair factors in the past and how that is continuing now. So Heidi, if you could first talk about what's going on with legislation.
Sure, that is a huge question, but I'll do my best. And there's, a lot of history, but and we've had an affordable housing crisis, for decades. And so in Wisconsin, when the Walker administration took over, and starting in like 2011, there was a series of bills that were aimed at changing landlord tenant laws to do a few things. One, to limit what local governments like the city of Madison and Dane County can do to regulate landlords and protect tenants, as well as, enact and enforce fair housing ordinances and habitability standards and things like that. So there was a series of laws that were enacted that went after local control and local legislative authority in these areas. And one of those, very relevant during the pandemic, said that, the county or the city can't enact a local eviction moratorium or enforce an ordinance to do that. And every day, people are sending me places even today, oh, LA County just, extended eviction moratorium. It's like, all right, I wish we could. But that, and they also changed the eviction procedure to make it quicker and easier really to evict tenants. They changed the landlord tenant statute in a number of ways, and you know, made it easier to evict tenants even if they pay the rent that they owe. So that legislation really made a bad situation worse. So, you know, you already have a situation with a landlord tenant imbalance of power. You have a situation where when you go to eviction court, you have, you know, landlords that are more likely to have lawyers. You have tenants that are, you know, unlikely to have lawyers. And then you add laws that take away tenant protections and make it easier and quicker to move through the eviction process. And then you also tell local government that, you know, guess what? You don't have the rights that you used to have to try to protect tenants. Madison has a rich history and a full chapter 32 of their general ordinances. And I mean, there still are things in there. I don't want to say that they all went away, but some stuff did. Our ability to enforce some of those ordinances did go away. So you add this change in tenant protections, this gutting of tenant protections, to a situation where you have, you know, a huge need and shortage of affordable housing, and you have a very competitive market for tenants who are trying to get into housing. For every, you know, 20 units of low-income housing, there's 100 people that need them, right? So you it's so hard to get access to affordable housing, years-long wait lists, right? And then there's all sorts of screening criteria that landlords, you know, engage in that also keep low-income people out of housing. So you add that legislative direction and real kind of limitation on local government to a situation that's already very favorable to landlords, and it really puts tenants and renters and low-income people in a precarious situation. And previously, I mean, Wisconsin has had laws on the books that limit what the state and local governments can do to create low-income housing. So, you know, in other states, they have tools they can use, like requiring a developer to include, you know, a certain percentage of their apartments for low-income people, make sure they're affordable, right? Inclusionary zoning. Other states have that. Madison tried to do that, and the rental component of that was struck down in the courts. You know, we also, you know, don't have an ability like other jurisdictions to just cap rents.
Right.
So we have to have rent control, like you referenced. So we have a situation where there's a huge affordable housing crisis. We're not getting adequate funding at the federal level to address this need. And yet at the state and local level, we don't have the tools that they use in other states to sort of make up for that problem.
Right.
So it feels like, you know, what do we do? It can really seem like it is an overwhelming issue. And I know that you are interested in talking about solutions. So I look forward to that. But I think that's what we're dealing with now is we have just such a ginormous need for affordable housing units. We have renters that are on the edge, whose rights have been attacked. And this very competitive market just to get into rental housing. And then when you get there, your situation continues to be so precarious. So this pandemic has been a very different sort of situation because for a little while there, some tenants had more protection to stay in place. But always, you know, we're always just on the edge of our seats waiting for that moratorium to be lifted, right? And it sounds like that federal moratorium might be extended one more month from reports today, which would be a very good thing. But again, that's only going to protect some renters, and what happens at the end of that month.
Right.
There's really nothing in place that's going to prevent us from just going back to where we were before, which is that there's, tens of thousands of renters in Dane County that are in very precarious situations, and hundreds of literally homeless people, and thousands of people that we know are uncounted and sort of unfortunately invisible from our methods of identifying people who are homeless, because that's what the laws sort of force people to do, is to try not to be seen, because then they could
Oh,
be
absolutely.
punished and criminalized. So
Absolutely. Thank you, Heidi. Yeah, and definitely some of that stuff you've talked about, I've seen not only in my work in rapid rehousing, but in my own personal life, looking for affordable housing, especially in Madison. I've seen studio apartments going for $1,700 a month or even higher than that, and it's just not practical for the majority of people who live here. Byron, would you be able to kind of talk with us about how this legislation has been tinged with, racism, sexism, and classism, and in the past, and how that is still continuing today?
Well, so Heidi did a really good job in building the foundation of what's going on and what has been going on in our state and in our community. And I look at these things that we're dealing with in the Department of Civil Rights. They're connected to these landlords who sometimes I think are bullying people and have the right to do so because the laws are in their favor. And so we see discrimination occur in those lanes because of the abilities of landlords feeling like nothing can really touch them or stop them from doing what they're doing. Policy, procedures, patterns, and practices should never precede people, but it does. And so because
I really like that. I really like that statement.
Because of that, I've had landlords who've gone through our process flat out tell us that, why should we play nice because there's a wait list of people waiting to get into our properties. There's no incentive for them to be different or do different. And then when we look at trying to change things, people say it's really difficult to change things at the local levels. That's very true. And what we found in our research is that a lot of the lawmakers at the state level are property owners, which for us creates a conflict of interest when, we've got folks who won't change the laws because it might affect them in their pocketbooks. And so, when we think of housing and historically how it affects people from a protective class standpoint in our community, we look at these three things. We look at affordability, accessibility, and availability. And affordability means a whole lot of things to a whole lot of people. But for us in civil rights, we kind of look at linking the affordability to wages, what a person actually is making to what they actually can afford. And so that's a big deal for us in a lot of conversations. It's, if we in our studies, we realize that, a single parent with multiple dependents making $80,000 a year, it has a difficult time paying rent. That's a decent salary in any community, but why is this person struggling to pay rent and having to choose between paying rent, buying medications, getting groceries, or cutting stuff out for the kids? And that's tough to do. And so these are the real conversations that we have. And then the other thing is that the evictions that we look at in our community. So for me, and this is just me, not anybody else. Let me put that out there. But evictions and non-renewals to me are kind of one and the same because they end up doing the same thing. So just because the process of how we get to one or the other is different, the end result is still the same. And so when I hear reporting talking about, oh, evictions are down in Madison, evictions are down in our community, evictions are down. And I'm thinking, that's not necessarily accurate, because I see all the non-renewals come through, and because that doesn't go through necessarily the court process, you don't have the same tally of those numbers. And so the reporting might be a little skewed in some ways. So that's something that I like to put out. Now, what I can tell you is, thank you for that. So what I can tell you is the Equal Opportunities Commission is really, for the last couple of years, been looking at issues of housing in our community. And one of the things that they, in their fight for trying to bring a better awareness to what's going on in our community about housing, is they also have realized that if we're going to make any change locally, we have to figure out how to do it at the state level. And so what they are considering doing, and started the conversations of finding out what other municipalities throughout the state strategically, who are having some of the same serious housing issues that we're experiencing in our community, and finding out what lawmakers they're connected to in those areas, and partnering and linking and coming together to make a larger argument that will identify in somebody else's backyard what's happening throughout the state, and causing folks to pay attention to them from that level, from a political standpoint. And so the commission is, Equal Opportunities Commission is engaged in having those conversations right now with other municipalities to see if there's a way that we can bring a different type of awareness at a higher level and put things out to let people know this is what we're dealing with. Or, as I identified, if there's potential conflicts of interest, those will be known.
Fantastic. Well, that sounds like the Equal Opportunities Commission, is really doing that work and starting and figuring out, if this is working somewhere, how do we find out the people who made it work, and how do we get that here? So you kind of touched, Byron, about affordable housing, and obviously affordable housing doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. So starting with you, Byron, what does affordable housing mean to you personally, and what structures need to change to ensure that affordable housing is available to everybody?
It's a loaded question, and what it means to me just really means that a person has the ability to work and live and prosper in a community where their wages can allow them the opportunity to live comfortably in their environment, and where the person isn't what I would call house poor, and so where they're spending all of their money or a large percent of their income in housing, which we have all these weird formulas that are out there that I don't like any of them. Just saying. And because of that, I don't know if we've actually come up with the right formula yet at this point. I think we have a lot of formulas that we follow for WIDA and for HUD and for builders and for this and for that and the other. But then for the person who actually, the end user, the person who has to pay the rent and live someplace, those formulas may not work for them. And so, and we try to make it fit into what we want, and it doesn't always fit. Now, from a larger perspective, what do we do as a community that way? I mean, how do we create an opportunity to get a builder and a developer to want to develop something in our community that actually really is affordable? I mean, and what does that mean, and what does that look like? I don't know. Does that mean that one bedrooms are, $700, and that's what, based upon the average wages here, what people can afford? I don't know. Then we go up incrementally from a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom or a townhome or a duplex, or, and then I don't, because I don't know what would be the magic number. And I think that's the question for everyone to figure out. And then, as Heidi identified earlier on, we have all these regulatory things that restrict what we might want to do, or for every suggestion we put out there, somebody's going to come back and say, well, you can't do that. And so we have to really figure out how to take the fight to the right level and to figure out what really is going to be the need for our community.
Thank you, Byron. And I think that, kind of what you were saying in some of that is we have to be able to find people who are going to put people over profit is a big factor in creating affordable living in our area or anywhere, really. Heidi, would you like to go next and kind of talk about what affordable housing means to you and how you see that becoming a reality?
Sure. I think I generally think of it as, you're going to have a housing payment that's not more than 30% of your monthly income, which is how HUD would define it for purposes of, Section 8 rent assistance or public housing. However, it does have other definitions. And, a lot of times, and the most popular strategy for creating new affordable housing since the 80s has been the low-income housing tax credit program. And that really is a program that's in the private sector. It gives tax credits, a public subsidy to developers, many for-profit developers, to develop modestly affordable housing that's not at all tied to somebody's income. So while the rents are capped and there are some, criteria for what the rents can be and at what levels they are, they're not at all guaranteeing the household in that unit is going to be able to afford their rent, particularly if they experience any kind of change in income from the time that they first are admitted into that unit. And the other problem with that program, of course, is that it doesn't create permanent affordability. So our housing strategy as a country has largely shifted from, public housing, publicly owned and controlled, that, guarantees for those tenants the right to continue to live there with rent adjusted based on their income, to a strategy of giving public money to private developers to create housing that's modestly affordable and isn't going to stay that way forever. So I think that's a big problem. And when I think about what we can do about it, I'm not optimistic that there's a lot of altruistic realtors and developers out there. Maybe I'm cynical. Maybe I've been on the kind of opposite side of them on several policy debates. But I really think it's about community control over land. It's about public ownership and getting our land out of the private market that just wants to use housing to make money and has no duty or ethic or obligation to provide it to people because it's a human right. So we need to think about who our partners are that are mission driven, that are not, required to generate a profit, that share our goals of permanent affordability, that recognizes the situations of the households that are going to live there. So that's what I think affordability has to be, something that is going to recognize that you have changes in your income, and also be permanent, not something that you can just be non-renewed out of, or evicted if you lose your job or need to take time off work because you're having a baby, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so really talking about, life circumstances, and, someone may be able to afford an above market rent apartment at this point in time and has an extreme medical situation and can no longer afford that. And getting evicted due to that is going to stay on your record. So Shanita, if you could just touch quickly on what affordable housing means to you, and then talks about some of your personal experiences with housing, as well as, what we're seeing in the rapid rehousing program through Just Dane.
Well, I think that Byron and Heidi said it best. I'm more like Heidi. I'm not as optimistic with the whole affordable housing. I mean, what I think affordable housing is people able to pay their bills, live comfortably, and not be worried about, everything else, or like Heidi said, paying 80% of your income to live in, a nicer place. Because that's also the other part, right? Is like different locations or communities. So like you have the like really good side of towns and the sides that are not as well, that needs some extra love and attention. And so for a lot of people, they don't want to live in those areas. And so I think reinvesting, like Heidi said, back into our communities is going to be important. And going to some of those higher crime, whatever they want to call them, whatever stereotype they want to put on them, and just bringing those back up to, I mean, I was born and raised in Madison, so I remember the good days where you could leave your door open and me and my brothers used to sleep outside on the porch, stuff like that. And I mean, even a small town like Madison has changed. And so, just things like that. And a little bit of my own personal experience with housing and access to it has not been easy for me. I am firmly incarcerated. I did a little time in Chichita, and I've been home now for 17 years and have been I've been lucky at the
Congratulations.
thank you. I've been lucky at the same time, but the first landlord I went through was just a guy who really cared about the bottom dollar, but was kind enough to give me a chance. And so I did stay there for a while to build up my rental history, but it wasn't in the most favorable neighborhood. I heard police sirens and things literally every day. And my resilience, I just was able to like block it out. But everyone's not like that. And so that it was a difficult time. And then I was able to find housing in Fitchburg. And then during that time, I was constantly looking at other places. And that's when I really, after being home for like 6 years, really started seeing that my conviction was a barrier. So much so that I got the letters that stated, due to your criminal conviction, which had nothing to do with housing. I mean, had nothing to do with it. I had never been evicted before. I mean, I was a very young adult when I went in, so I didn't have a rental history, but there was nothing to say like, she messed up property. There was no damage to property. It had their decision to not give me housing had nothing to do with my crime. And so that was a real realization for me. And I'll even say now, the place that I live at, most people would consider it not the best of places. But I've been here 11 years because when I tried again 4 years ago, after thinking, okay, it's been over a decade now, somebody's going to want me. I got great rental history. I've never been late, never had a situation. I got 3 positive reviews from landlords, and I still was getting the same thing 4 years ago due to your criminal history. And I just was like, are you like, and I was working for the university in the dean's office. Like, are you kidding? I have access to people's social security numbers, but you won't let me live in your apartment? Like, and so it's been a hard thing it was a hard thing to swallow. And now with my work in rapid rehousing, and because one of the extra criteria that we added for our program, because of who we are, is that the person has to have I won't say criminal, had been locked up, incarcerated for at least 30 days, which is what putting something on a person's record. And the same things that I dealt with myself, I'm dealing with the people I'm working with. Younger people who've never had an apartment but got in trouble 2 years ago.
Right.
Again, had nothing to do with a department situation, but can't get a place because of her criminal history. Or let's be honest, and again, with rapid rehousing, as Kim said, it has to come off a coordinated entry. So that means everyone coming off that list is homeless. Normally, most of those people are chronically homeless.
Yes.
So then they're dealing with being homeless. They're dealing with having a conviction on their record, maybe income, no income. But we're saying we will give you this money because that's the bottom dollar, right? Like, and that's what I've told people who don't want to rent to us. I'm like, but your main goal is to make money. And what I'm telling you is we got your money.
Mhm.
So it's been very challenging these last 6 months, but there
Mhm.
has been some success. So I don't want to make it seem like it's all just
Right.
like a dreary
Right.
story.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, we have a father who with his 2 children who's housed, and we have a couple of other single people that we've gotten housed. So it's been rewarding. And I'll tell you this, when I get that call that a person's been housed, I feel like
Mhm.
it's me. Like I
Yes.
scream and I holler because I know, and it's a very personal journey that we do with them. We're there with them every step of the way. Um, and so I have been sitting on some committees and trying to talk to the people at the apartment association. I think I've made a friend there. And so we're going to keep pushing. We're going to keep fighting because, as Kim said, and anybody who knows me knows that this is a very personal thing for me, that housing is a person's right. And that without housing, a person's not going to be stable. They could have a job for a certain amount of time. A lot of things could happen, but they're not going to stay stable for a long time. For me, I know being housed has been my sanctuary. And so
Mhm.
we're going to continue to fight for it.
Mhm. Thank you, Shanita. And I just wanted to also clarify for some of you who are with us who might not know about people's conviction records and how that applies to housing. Um, Landlords are able to look at somebody's background and based on what their charges were, they can legally say that they would be a danger to be housed on that property. The thing is with that, which I'm hoping that Robin will be able to kind of expand on this as well as what we've been talking about already, is about how in some instances landlords will kind of find ways to use that as a way out, to not rent to people or to look at convictions and have unrelated charges to something related to housing and still find a way to deny people for that. So Robin, we're talking about these issues that are going on in our community and what affordable housing really is. And would you be able to talk to us kind of about how working with the Tenant Resource Center and working with tenant rights kind of plays into this? And if you're seeing some of these same things that Shanita was talking about. And also, Robin, if you'd like to introduce yourself to us, that would be great.
Yeah, so sorry for being late. I just, for some reason, had the wrong night in my head.
It happens to all of us.
So I'm at Tenant Resource Center. Been there for a couple of years now, and we do see these things all the time, right? These discriminatory practices, and particularly, we also had a rapid rehousing program that we are ending at the end of this year for several reasons. But, we see these unfair practices, and I think again, between myself and Byron, and Heidi and folks, that we see it, we know it's happening, we can identify it, and there's certainly protections in place, particularly in the city of Madison, as well as in Wisconsin, but they're hard to prove, right? They're just a little bit insidious enough that what's going on, that it's connected to, right, incarceration, it's connected to race, and, finding kind of that evidence, I think sometimes it's tough for a lot of folks. And that's one of the reasons why we've been, I think, successful. We've got decades of watching this and kind of know maybe which properties have those practices and what we need to do on the front end with an application to kind of neutralize some of those things that we expect to see in a denial letter when we know folks have certain housing barriers. So, I'd like to say it's not common, but it's incredibly common here. I mean, that's why there's these massive disparities, particularly in housing and different pieces, mostly connected to race, but absolutely incarceration. And, when we see landlords not using the exact same screening criteria, we have to ask them to do that. We use every piece of our kind of credibility in the community to make sure that we can help a tenant write that letter and say, hey, here's why my denial doesn't feel right. Or on the front end, when you're putting the application in, to try to do those pieces. And, it's disheartening, but we certainly see those things happen all the time.
Thank you, Robin, for sharing. And I'd also like to continue with you with this next question. So during this last year and dealing with this pandemic we've been living through, we have had an COVID eviction moratorium in effect. And now that that may be coming to an end at the end of this month here, it looks like there's a possibility it will be extended. But what could you explain what this means for our community and kind of what you expect to see happening when this moratorium is ended?
I mean, I can speak to that a bit, and I'm sure Heidi has some pieces to add. Depending on whether it ends June 30th or July 30th, we know it's ending. We know that folks are, very fearful. It's extremely stressful for tenants. Obviously, we're running a very large rental assistance program. Putting out right around $1 million a week in assistance, and there's a lot more money to come into our community with that. But the stress level of, unfortunately, both tenants and landlords, we see it on both sides, and kind of, the avoidance of it that the pandemic has created, right? It's affected all of our mental health, and it's on both sides. So we see even less community connection and communication. We have seen more non-renewals than we could have ever anticipated. Right now, because that protection is placed, but it does place the onus on the tenant to take some steps to make sure it's in place. We do a lot of outreach around that and make sure that folks know about that, particularly that are, involved in court. Evictions have never stopped throughout this process at any point. Right now, for rent violations, what we consider a rent violation in your lease, fortunately, people, are not being put out on the street per se, right? But it will happen very soon, as well as the amount of cases will go up exponentially in court, where we're seeing right around 20 to 30 right now. I'm sure we'll see at least 3 or 4 times that as the moratorium ends, even though there's all this money coming. And I think that's one of the hard pieces as a community, right? We haven't seen our elected officials come forward and really try to do some advocating and speaking with landlords. And, we are working pretty closely with the apartment association, and they're actually, been good partners these last month or so of trying to get out to landlords and say, hey, like, just hold steady. There's money coming. It's expensive to turn over units, right? It's if you want to just talk about dollars and cents, let's talk about dollars and cents. But I think because of the stress that the pandemic has put on every single person, there's this, even more dehumanizing pieces in it, where people are not communicating. And if somebody acts different or looks different than you, or you think they should be working harder than you are, unfortunately, right, we're seeing them non-renewed and put out.
Thank you for bringing up that really important point about how, the stress from this past year or so in our lives is really affecting everybody. Heidi or Shanita or Byron, would any of you like to kind of talk about what you think about what's going to happen now that this eviction moratorium, when it is ended?
For me, it's we're expecting, as Robin identified, cases for us to go up. Cases where, in fact, I'm already seeing it. We had 2 come in the door today. So and after the 30th, it's going to go way up, and so we're trying to gear up and prepare and be ready for an increase of those cases and how they're connected to people being discriminated against or retaliated against in some way. A lot of times it's tied to retaliation in some way. Where, the one thing that really bothers me through all of it is when you have a tenant that wants to help and comply, but the landlord is trying to take advantage of the situation using the tenant to do it. And these are the cases that we're going to have a different conversation about these types of cases, because I think they take 2 separate lanes for us. So so those are the things we're trying to keep a watchful eye on these things, and trying to see what we can do, trying to make sure we're staying very closely connected to all of our community partners that are doing this work and working with tenants. And I think we're just going to have to support each other and do the best we can do to get people through these situations.
Thank you.
For me, I'm kind of hoping I can get some people into some units, but I don't think that that's going to happen. That in the beginning, that is what I kind of thought, like, okay, you're going to have all these people getting evicted, which is not really helping the bottom line of what we're trying to do now anyway. But I could maybe get some people into housing. But I fear that because of what's happened during the pandemic, that landlords are going to be even more stingier and not wanting to work with people who are even working with programs where there might be guaranteed funding just because of the resistance I'm seeing now. I don't think it's going to be a difference. And because in Madison, especially, they don't have to rent to our people, right? They have enough of, what they consider better tenants, people who are working and may not have these difficulties in their background. I truthfully think it's going to be worse. And we're just going to have a bigger homeless population that has no place to go.
Heidi, did you have any thoughts you wanted to share on this? And you kind of touched on it earlier when you spoke about the moratorium.
One thing that's been interesting about the moratorium, I guess, is you've seen landlords shift to evict people for other reasons, because once they got, many landlords just went ahead and tried to evict people for rent anyway. Sometimes even after they were served one of the CDC declarations that should have stopped them from proceeding, but they really just were waiting for some judge to order them to stop. And if tenants, aren't able to exercise their rights, if they're intimidated, it's very stressful and traumatic to be in court. If they don't have a lawyer, it's easy to kind of get run over in that process. And so a lot of landlords are just going ahead and successful in carrying out evictions, even though protections for the CDC moratorium were invoked by the tenant. But because, the tenant struggled to exercise their rights and that wasn't actively investigated by the court, a lot of people fell through the cracks, even though there was a federal order intended to protect them. But we also saw landlords who were stopped by the courts because, the declaration was on file, and the judge or the commissioner or the tenant's lawyer, made sure that they were protected. So then landlords would serve a notice for another reason, right? They would, because there were other reasons that they could evict. The CDC moratorium was not a sort of blanket moratorium that stopped all evictions. It was it's been a pretty weak moratorium. As Robin said, we've been dealing with evictions the whole time throughout this. And so, but what we're gonna see is that if a landlord can file an eviction for rent, that's the easiest thing for them to prove. Okay, so that's always going to be their first cause of action, eviction. They're going to file for a rent default because all they have to show is that this is what the rent is and they didn't pay. I served the 5-day notice. They didn't pay within the 5 days. End of story. I win. So when that moratorium goes away, again, you get back to the situation where, these rent evictions, if the person is, maybe they got their rent assistance, right? But what happens the next month? What happens the next month if their situation is still, or the month after that, if their situation is still unstable and they're still in affordable housing? And so throughout the pandemic, we saw more than the typical number of cases for a quote unquote rule violation, a disturbance, unauthorized guest, or, all these other things that may or may not be substantiated, but because the landlord, really wanted to get them out because they weren't paying rent, or they just wanted to get them out, they were going to, use whatever they could to evict people. So we're going to go back to seeing, I think a lot more rent-based evictions. And the non-renewals have been nonstop. So many folks just did not get another lease and are on month-to-month tenancies and have been served those 28-day notices. And the courts took a really mixed view of whether or not they were protected. They were not adequately protected by the CDC orders. So, a big problem we have is with non-renewals, as as Byron said, and in most cases, the tenant's going to has the burden to show, that non-renewal was discriminatory. In the city of Madison, you have some more protections and a presumption for retaliation if you've contacted building inspection within the last 6 months. But, by and large, it can be very difficult in regular private housing to defend an eviction just based on non-renewal, because the landlord doesn't need to have a good reason.
Right.
Unlike some jurisdictions, which actually have a protection that requires a landlord to have good cause before they non-renew you. That would be a huge benefit, of course, and makes a whole bunch of sense, right? To protect people from being evicted without good cause. But we only have that in our subsidized housing programs. We only have that in the low-income housing tax credit program right now. So most renters in the private market are very vulnerable to non-renewals.
So Kim, there's a lot of questions coming in about.
I'm seeing that. Yes.
In the chat.
Yes.
If you want to kind of address some of those, and then we can get on to other topics, but I think these might be timely, to ask now.
Yeah, let's take a look at that. So, so talking about kind of like the restrictions that are going on, based on different areas and stuff, maybe Heidi, you can kind of answer some of these questions about, are there more restrictions that local governments can legally add that are not currently in place? And how can our elected officials like alders and such help in this kind of area of putting more restrictions in place to help people be able to have affordable housing?
That's a really good question. Thanks, Tyson. So what we've been doing at the county level, and I think we should do more of, and we should do it with more, vigor, is we are borrowing money to make available in our capital budget to put out to create affordable housing. So we are putting out an RFP soon of $7 million, which isn't a lot when you think about how much money we need, but it's a lot more than it was when we started the fund in 2014 or whatever. So this is money that the county is investing to create affordable housing. So we put out an RFP saying we want to create this type of housing. And what we did a couple years ago is we added criteria in that RFP to incentivize the developers that were applying for this funding to agree to like fair chance screening policies, to remove the barriers that Shanita experienced and her clients are experiencing, and we have reasonable, guest policies, and what are some other ones? Limits on security deposits and late fees, like we used to be able to enforce in the city of Madison. So some of these things that we can no longer enforce because the state government took away, the county is adding to its own affordable housing that it's creating in partnership with the private sector. Because in that sense, we have a contractual relationship, and through our contracting process, we can add additional criteria and incentivize good behavior, because this is the type of housing we want. We want housing to be fair. We want our county dollars, well, at least I do for sure, to be targeted to the folks that have the hardest time getting housing in the private market. We only have so much money that we can use for this. I think we should be borrowing more and prioritizing this for our capital expenditures and not jail. But that's another conversation.
Yes.
But this is the money we have. Let's target it to the people that are most vulnerable. And we have an opportunity right now with our federal American Rescue Plan Act dollars, and then additional emergency rent assistance that's coming in, and the emergency housing vouchers that are coming into the CDA and the DCHA to really put forward a plan that can make a big difference for people experiencing homelessness and housing insecurity. We haven't seen this kind of money come into our community in the past. And it's not going to be here forever, but we really need our elected officials to target it to the folks that need it the most, right? That are most vulnerable at all times, and especially during a pandemic. So by that, using that contracting process, and by funding organizations that organize, support tenants, that provide housing services to people and case management and all that other stuff that people need to be successful in housing is really important. And one thing that I also think we really need to be looking at is more creative options that are focused on home ownership and building like wealth, because a renter's position is, one, very precarious, especially if you have a private landlord, you don't have a lot of rights in your housing. But if we, let's look at cooperative housing models, let's look at community land trust, let's look at micro units and other ways that aren't just the cookie cutter low-income housing tax credit projects that are gonna, expire and go back into the, regular luxury market,
right. Being creative.
Yeah, being creative and also thinking beyond just rental, because they're the money, like with this emergency rent assistance, it's great that we have money to try to, pay people's back rent. But at the end of the day, that's all going to the property owner. Right. It's just rent, and people are renting. It's like, you're not able to keep any of that. You're paying so much money. And at the end of the day, like, you don't own it, and you don't have control over your future, really. And you're subject to non-renewal and all these other insecurities that I already mentioned. So I think looking at some different models, using our contracting process and really making it a priority by investing in the organizations and that are supporting folks and working on this issue is critical. And absolutely, Justine is one of those.
Thank you so much, Heidi. So just to clarify from a question in the chat, that when we're talking about landlords, we really are talking about anybody who is the owner of the property or who is in control of the policies that determine who is allowed to live there or who they are going to rent to. So that could be a property management company, that could be an independent landlord. It could look like a lot of things, but basically it's whoever controls that housing is who we are referring to. So when we're talking about these things, and we've got some people in the chat asking, if locally this is a problem, are there any specific landlords or companies that are known to have these practices that we may be able to address? Or is this something that could be taken to the level of something such as like a class action lawsuit? I don't know, maybe Heidi or Robin would have some insight more into that. Maybe Shanita might know a little bit. I know Heidi and Robin kind of work more in that technical side.
I was to say, I noticed Mitch is here. Speaking of class action lawsuits, if he's willing, maybe speak, or Heidi, I think are probably the bigger experts that actually do that work, right?
Okay.
Not to put you on the spot, Mitch, but
can you repeat the question again?
The main point of the question is since this is a larger scale issue, is this something that some sort of legal action could be taken on a large level against these landlords and property owners that have these predatory practices and make it difficult for more people to get into housing?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are potential Fair Housing Act violations for a landlord who has a policy that has a discriminatory impact on people who are members of our protected class. Those are not super easy cases, I have to say. So, and like a legal aid organization by federal law is, in terms of class actions, are prohibited. Like the federal government prohibits federally funded legal services grantees from filing a class action, and which is obviously very frustrating and limits the tools available to low-income people to pursue their rights to the full extent of the law. So there are some barriers there, but certainly, we're always looking, and I know the Civil Rights Office is always looking, and the Fair Housing Council for patterns and practices that we can keep track of to build cases that are impact cases that will affect more than just one person.
Okay.
I mean, we can file affirmative, lawsuits on behalf of multiple plaintiffs. That's different than a class action, which involves a whole certification of a class of people to be represented by particular, litigants within a action. So, I don't know if that's a very good answer to your question, but yes,
It's
I think
very
there
clarifying.
are potential claims there. There are barriers to pursuing them. I think what's really helpful is when people can, keep track of their experiences in writing and keep their records. Like when somebody says something like, we hear this all the time. Well, the landlords don't take Section 8.
Right.
And Section 8 is a protected class in the city of Madison and Dane County. It's like, well, that's not a thing. They can't say that. That's illegal. But we know that they do say that.
Yes.
But we need to know who said it, right?
Right.
When,
We need
who
the
was
details.
that landlord that told you that? When did they say it? To be able to prepare a claim, you gotta keep good records. You gotta keep a notebook of your communication so we can trace that back and work on filing a claim with Byron's office or affirmative, a lawsuit, a civil action or something like that. So
I think the other piece in that, right, is like, and you touched on it, Heidi, but right, folks that we're working with, for the most part, keeping documentation like that, sticking with something for, months, if not years, it's like the CDC moratorium. This onus is on the tenant who is already stressed and under-resourced. And then we're asking them to do these things that are just really unlikely. And then there's other pieces of like shame, right? Like, oh, if you could just do this, and I think we have to be really careful what we're asking the folks we're working with to do, and absolutely like preparing them with the tools to advocate for themselves to the best of their ability. But also just knowing that like even filing a discrimination claim, like a single claim, is hard and onerous when you have so many other things going on in life. I mean, I missed the meeting today and I'm fairly well resourced, right? Like,
right.
It's a hard thing we're asking folks to do.
It is. Well, Byron had to leave us early this evening, and I just wanted to let people know that that's why he's not with us answering questions. And Shanita actually has to leave the meeting early this evening as well. So I wanted to say thank you to Byron and thank you to Shanita for joining us this evening.
Yes,
And
thanks you guys for having me here. I do want to say, because I'm not going to be able here to answer, because I want to answer a positive question. I'll not like the other ones weren't positive, but I know that like some of the steps that are being taken that are going good or deserves a shout out are the landlords and the rental companies that are working with our people. Because I know listening tonight, it just seems like, oh my God, no one is helping, no one cares. It might be a small audience, it's not a whole lot, but I will say that the 4 different places that we have our people at, the people have been great, and they're allies now, and now they understand. And I think that's going to be something that some of these private landlords and these rental companies are just going to have to realize and see, that if given a chance, most people will do good. And so I don't want to leave here like, oh my God, every landlord in Madison sucks. There are some good ones out there, and we're just trying to get some more to like jump on board and see that. I mean, look at me 17 years later. Like, if it wasn't for John Doerr, which I wish he still had his properties, he gave people chances. And that's really what it's about, is if you give a person a chance, they normally won't disappoint you. So good night, everyone. I have to go back to another training. You guys have a great rest of your evening. I will leave my email in the chat though, if you guys ever want to reach out to me and talk to me about something. Want to link up? I need Heidi's information because I feel like I'm gonna get your information, Heidi, because we need to talk. All right, you guys have a great evening.
Thank you so much, Shanita.
Yep.
So now we're getting towards the end here, and I want to move on to, it's a pretty big topic when we might not have enough time to really go into this, but talking about homelessness in Madison and Dane County. Our city is having trouble coming to an agreement about a place to put a new men's shelter. While many unhoused community members are camping in places like Rydell Park with inadequate safety and comfort measures. Linda, our executive director, is here with us this evening, and I'd like to bring you into the conversation here and hear from you about what is expected of people who are living on the streets or tent camping in the cities and county parks, couch surfing, car camping, all of those invisible homeless situations that we generally don't see. And why is there such resistance to the location of a men's shelter for our homeless population, and what local policies and programs have been proven to reduce homelessness? I know that's kind of a lot to unpack, but I guess starting with, what's expected of our homeless neighbors?
Well, I think if we want to be brutally honest, what's expected is that people fade away and make sure that we don't have to see them. I think that's what our city wants, is for, if our city and county didn't want that, then, almost a decade ago when people set up an encampment at the old Don Miller car lot on East Washington and later became Occupy Madison, Occupy Village, they wouldn't have been shuffled around to dozens of places as the city and county tried to figure out how to get people out of there. And the reality is people who are unhoused, people who are experiencing homelessness are much more likely to be victimized and exploited and taken advantage of and harmed than they are to harm anyone else. And we have increasingly, it's not just this community, but across the country, criminalized poverty by making it illegal to carry out the daily activities of daily living, sleeping and going to the bathroom. And even feeding people in public spaces is increasingly becoming illegal for Good Samaritans, for agencies, for groups to set up meal sites. But the city and county have, and Heidi, you can maybe correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's the joint liaison committee of the city and county that kind of has some oversight over the city county buildings. So it wasn't that many years ago that when many people would go to sleep on the steps of the city county building, and disproportionately men of color, but all of them individuals experiencing homelessness, living on the street, who would congregate on the steps of the city county building, in part because there's safety in numbers and there's community in numbers. And that's why we see people in campsites together. But the city county liaison committee decided, after it came up for a vote 3 times, because the mayor and the county executive didn't like the outcome of the first 2 votes, so they kept pushing to get it back on the agenda. And finally, they created an ordinance that prevented people from being on the grounds of the city county building after hours, and punishable by a $469 trespassing ticket.
Wow.
Now, I'm pretty sure I could go down to the city county building right now and sit on the steps of the city county building without being ticketed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also pretty sure that 80% of the individuals who walk through our doors at Just Dane, who have any kind of justice involvement, who are Black, can't do that same thing, can't say that same thing with any certainty that they won't get a ticket for sitting on the steps of the city county building after hours. So I think what's expected, we expect people to go away. And that's why we don't make space. We don't make it easy for them to be anywhere. We make it illegal for them to be any place. We don't have public bathrooms downtown.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Where do you only get so many days in the shelter when we're not in the pandemic. You are looking for 275 days a year. You are looking for someplace else to sleep because you only get 90 days in the shelter. So where do you go to the bathroom? And then you get a ticket. And you don't pay the ticket, you end up in the court system with criminalized poverty. So this is part of what we've done. And it's all, and as much as as much as we like in Madison and in Dane County to blame the Walker administration for so many ills and Republicans for so many ills, this local stuff is all on us. This is all our progressive Madison and Dane County. These resolutions and ordinances that we've put in place that are harming our neighbors who are experiencing homelessness. So yeah, the legislature tore apart tenant rights, but we didn't have a community that welcomed people who were unhoused before that. If you remember when Joel Marino was murdered, and that was a tragedy. The city of Madison, people jumped to the assumption and the conclusion that it must have been someone who was experiencing homelessness who committed that murder. The city police department were trying to get DNA swabs from people who were on the streets, living on the streets, simply because they were homeless. That's how convinced they were that this must, so there's that stigma, there's that. So thanks, Tyson, because I can go off on a rant. So the homeless shelter, it's NIMBY. It's NIMBY, and we have a city that has, and part of the objection to the location of the men's shelter on Zaire Road was that there are out of country and out of state developers who want to put high-end luxury condos and apartments in parking lots areas of Easttown Mall. And apparently it's better to look out from your luxury condo onto a dying shopping mall than it is to look out from your luxury condo on a brand new purpose-built shelter that's providing a function and a support for the community. Mm-hmm. So, but there was a lot of NIMBYism, a lot of this is going to harm property values. And Heidi and Robin and Byron were still on the call, and Gail, I see a number of people who know this very well. It's not going to matter where a site is proposed. There will be this pushback and there will be this desire not to have it anywhere. I sit on I co-chair the City County Homeless Issues Committee, and this has been a big topic. And at the last meeting, there was a couple of alders have introduced a resolution that we voted to table that would have added criteria to the search so that it would have required that the men's shelter be located within 3.5 miles of the beacon, that it couldn't be adjacent to any private homes or single family homes. So again, just putting in more and more criteria to make it harder and harder. And then they tried to argue that, well, this just, if we can't find something, we don't have to do that. And of course, maybe I'm old and jaded. My belief is that if that passes, then those two criteria will be used over and over and over again to refuse to put a shelter someplace that's identified. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot, and we went through this with the beacon and citing the beacon and the day shelter and potentially having it on the Messner site, which the city bought, or the county bought, excuse me, thinking they could put the day shelter there, but that didn't happen. There was a lot of pushback. Mm-hmm. So, and again, if you listen to and I encourage you, if you haven't sat in on any of the city, county, or committee meetings related to the men's shelter, please do, because you need to hear the blatant racism, discrimination, and just the vitriol that is freely being spewed at by people, our neighbors, testifying in opposition to placing a shelter in their area. It's really truly disturbing, and it's truly disturbing that we have alders who have helped whip up some of that fervor in an attempt to keep it out of their district. So I hope I wasn't too blunt. I'm not always known for diplomacy.
No. Linda, we do have a guest, Tyson, who does want to ask you a specific question about the proposal. Would that be all right with you? Mm-hmm. Yes, Tyson.
First, thank you, Linda. I'm like having a visceral to what you were saying, because it's so true. And like in my angry mode, I need to get out of it, because you're right. What you see at those council meetings is just really, it's angering. It's disgusting. So anyway, I do have a specific question for you in regards to just what's going to be happening moving forward. Just like you said, here's what's going to happen. Alder Abbas, from what I understand, 90% is going to be proposing 2 sites that are going to be downtown. Those sites already are not going to work. They're going to fail. They're not going to get approved, and they're not going to move forward. We're going to be in the same cycle that we've continued down the road, like that we've been going through. And, you know, in my head, how I've been active in this now, like politically, for not too long, for the last few years with this specific issue. And in my head, I think the best way to combat that is essentially, I'm thinking in my head, I need my upper middle class friends and my middle class friends to step up and start being the face of this issue too. We can't have the same, you know, folks advocating because it just obviously won't work, and it's unfortunate, and that's how this works, and it's all about optics sometimes, it seems. And so I've been, you know, and if my friends are listening, hey guys, step up, call them to the next council meeting, thank you. You know, that's from my limited perspective, and I know you have a far broader perspective on me on this issue, and have been working on this for years. What other ways to combat this to ensure that community members that are listening can advocate for this in a successful way? And I think there is momentum right now to really change this. Quite frankly, I think because of the virtual meetings now and people able to so easily tune in and see what's really going on here, you know, what's really happening, and not just at face value, which is just straight up racism and NIMBYism. I think there is an opportunity to move forward. And I guess my question is, you know, that's going to happen. We already know that's going to happen of what the next steps are from the other side. For the side that wants to advocate for this, from your perspective, what's the most effective way to make that happen?
Well, Tyson, thank you for the question. I think it's just what you said. So if at various committees, it's the same advocates and the same activists who are testifying at every meeting. And so it becomes, I think, very easy for our alders to tune that out and say it's just the same 30 people. So I think it's really important that people who haven't yet contacted their alders do so. Now, I also want to point out, I think it's interesting because there's a lot of discussion at the national level right now, kind of about whether we should do away with the filibuster. I want to point out, when it comes to the purchase of the men's shelter site, that required a supermajority because it was a capital budget amendment. That night, it failed by 1 vote. So they needed 15 votes. They had 14. There is a majority of the Common Council that supports a men's shelter, a purpose-built men's shelter, that supported putting it at Zaire Road. So I think the focus should also be on those alders who, yes, Alder Abbas is president of the council, those alders who opposed, who voted against putting it on Zaire Road. I think really reaching out, and if you know people in their districts, to reach out to them and encourage them to contact. So, you know, Alder Miadze, Alder McKinney, Alder Carter, Alder Abbas, Alder Halverson, those are the 5 alders that voted against putting the shelter on Zaire Road. 1 alder was absent due to a family emergency, and that's why it's not clear how that alder might have voted, but that's why there were 14 votes, not the 15 needed to pass it that night. But I think it is important to recognize that there is a solid majority of the city council that supported that. But there are 5 and possibly 6 alders that really need to be consistently hearing from people and to kind of educate yourself. So part of the argument is saying, well, there's no plan. Well, there actually is a plan. There's been a plan for quite a while. There's been a contingency and that have gone to look at other purpose-built shelters. But I know Robin and I know Heidi have been involved in this too. So I'm going to stop talking and invite them to say something too before I just finish out the time.
Thank you so much, Linda. And since, you're leaving us with a really good action item of things that people in our community can do around areas of inequality in housing, I'd like to have our last 2 panelists that are here with us tonight give us, one or two things that are going right in our area around this. Some positive things that deserve to be brought to light and to be praised for their work. And what are, one or two action items community members can take around this need for affordable and equal housing. Heidi, do you want to go first? You look like you might be thinking, so.
Sure. So I've been a member of the Affordable Housing Action Alliance since I started working in this area in 2006. And I think, the group has sort of ebbed and flowed in terms of its numbers and capacity. But I would say for the last year or two, like we are having like 15 people show up at meetings. We're having elected officials and government staff, and we're really, I'm impressed, and that's because of some, great support from people like Gail and Marilyn File, and Robert and Lynn and I show up to those meetings, and Mary Anglum on this call. But I think there is, I think the community is starting to get more organized. And I think that's really critical. And I think we're really starting to, and we've got some really excellent, people working in this area in their day jobs. And I think it's an exciting time when we think about this opportunity with the federal money. It's a huge problem, but we have some opportunity, and we have experts in our community, the people doing the work, the service providers, and the people who have the lived experience. And I think if we can combine sort of the organizing, the activism, and the work together, and bring more people in, as Tyson mentioned, the folks that the mayor and the county exec and the electeds aren't used to seeing show up at these meetings, then I think we can really, really move the needle. But it can't be politically okay or convenient or a positive to shut down a men's shelter. It can't be okay to kick people off the city county building porch. It can't be okay to maintain policies that say, if you're camping in a campground in the Dane County parks, even if it's your only home, you have to move every 2 weeks, and you have to register online. That can't be okay. And that is the status quo. So we still have work ahead, but we really do have a lot of opportunities. And I think the community is getting more organized and growing our capacity in a way where we can really apply pressure and make change. So thanks so much for bringing us together.
Yeah, thank you, Heidi. Robin, what do you see as some good things and some positive steps that are going on right now around housing? And what is, one or two action items for us this evening?
Yeah, I think some of the things that we've seen in the past year is, people truly coming together as far as communities and raising funds, knowing particularly some of the more wealthy communities here, Shorewood, Dudgeon, Monroe, these places where they're raising funds for neighbors that they know, we probably don't need this in our community. So here we're raising money in the name of security deposits, and they're thinking about, right? People are now starting to think about like wealth redistribution and how you do those things, right? Paired with, okay, we know people lose security deposits because they don't understand the things you need to do when you check in. So kind of pairing it right with just like education and money, like they're putting their money like right where their political views are. I think those are really different, and I'm really kind of happy about that. I think most of us that do this work, and I can't speak for everybody, but I know myself, there are some biases, particularly around like wealth and those pieces of, the privilege of getting to not think, to not notice your neighbor who's experiencing homelessness. So I think when we see folks come together and do it, I really appreciate and see that people's minds are starting to open. I think as far as action items, that yeah, absolutely, the organizing piece is important. And I think sometimes that's overwhelming to people. And I think one of the things people forget is every single one of us can do outreach if we are talking to our neighbors, that we see this thing and are like, why isn't there a men's shelter? You see something, you say something, right? It's a little bit of bystander effect of like, hey, that seems weird. and the power in that, right? Calling on one-on-one to your elected official, to your alder, to your supervisor, and say, this just is not okay. Like, you know, maybe it's intimidating, right, to go to the meeting or register or stay up till 4 a.m. because our elected officials have figured out how to stop voices, right?
Right.
So you do it when it's convenient, right? But it's really impactful, particularly, as Tyson said, like those middle-class folks that just say, you know what, it doesn't make sense, right? When you think about the area median income in Dane County, you know, is over $70,000. I don't know who has all that money, but we are way too wealthy to have anybody experiencing homelessness or housing instability here. Until we start to have those frank conversations, like, you know, I'm from Chicago, we're not going to stop homelessness there, but here, there is no excuse for a single person to experience homelessness that doesn't, you know, choose that as a path.
Yes. Thank you so much, Robin.
Well, thank you for putting this together. I appreciate it very much.
It's been wonderful. Yes,
Kimberly,
Heidi.
I was just going to note that the Homeless Services Consortium also has an education and advocacy committee. And and we now have information on the website, and I just posted the link in the chat, but it has kind of all the relevant committees. There's a lot of them.
Oh, fantastic.
That cover this stuff. So if you're interested in showing up to learn or to, you know, give public comment, or keep an eye on legislation, that's a great resource to track this information. So we're excited about that, getting that up there. And I would encourage you all to bookmark it or whatever you do. And also the Affordable Housing Action Alliance, I see that Gail is posting that information. We meet on the first Wednesday of the month at 4:30, currently on Zoom. And they're on Facebook.
Thank you so much, Heidi. And just so if anybody else is unable to see the chat, the first website Heidi was talking about is danecountyhomeless.org /advocacy. And the second one is facebook.com /Madison AHAA.
All right. Thank you so much. This I'm amazed that we fit that into an hour and a half. I'm sure we could go on and on talking about this. But what an informative conversation. Thank you, Heidi and Robin and Shanita and Byron and Kim for having this conversation with us, and Linda for your insight as well. I hope everyone has a very good evening, and I hope you're leaving with some ideas of what you can do next to stay involved with this issue. All right. Thank you very much. Have a great night.